Healthy size avatars, exercise proclivity, inventor avatars, more creativity, gendered avatars, self-stereotyping, antisocial avatars, negatively griping. The list goes on. Effect size is relatively strong for a media effect phenomenon. And if you want these details and stats, I know that there's a published meta-analysis. I wrote it.
Hello world, you're listening to SpartyCast.
Hello and welcome to SpartyCast. Today we have a special episode, a talk that I gave at Carnegie Mellon University on April 1st. It's taken me a little while to process this file. The talk is called "The Metaverse Has Arrived. Hello, classes in VR. Goodbye, Zoom fatigue. April Fools." And it was a rare opportunity to give an April Fool's talk. One of those statements is actually true. I'll give you a hint. It's my classes in VR. I talk a bit about doing in headset class as well as being in the classroom and with my students together. It's all under this metaverse umbrella. In some ways, it represents the culmination of many of the topics that I've been thinking about through SpartyCast over these past months. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you don't judge me for copping out and not doing an actual SpartyCast episode. And we've got more of those to come, more cop-outs to come. But I also encourage you to check out our TikTok channel, which is full of exciting meme-worthy edutainment. All right. Thank you, SpartyCast listeners, and I hope you enjoy this talk, whether you listen to it or watch it.
Our speaker today, Robby does the kind of really interesting interdisciplinary work that leads him to work with all sorts of different departments. I think I counted like 7 different disciplines that you work in over at Michigan State, where he is an associate professor and also the AT&T scholar.
There are 2 of us.
There are 2. Okay, so one of only 2 AT&T scholars. He is interested in some of the same questions that we as an HCI department are interested in, right? How do media technologies, right, like avatars or agents, like Zoom, VR, right? We're going to be talking about things. How do they change the way people relate to one another? And how can we design these technologies in a way that improves the outcomes related to human flourishing, which might be, for example, educational. We're going to hear about some of that work today, but it could also include things like equity, inclusion, motivation. And again, these are all things that are really aligned with the research outcomes that we in this department are interested in. So I'm extremely excited to hear what Robby has to say. Before that, I need to tell you 2 fun facts. So fun fact number 1 is that Robby co-runs my favorite conference in the world, Meaningful Play, which is back on for October 2022.
Yes,
and
submission deadline in June.
And COVID permitting, I'm going to be there, and I am actively inviting all of you to join me. It's close enough to drive. We can take a road trip and have an awesome time playing with our research together. The second fun fact is that, unfortunately, we did not prepare for this, but Robby often lectures on a skateboard while skating around the classroom. So I'm going to turn over to him and leave you with that image. I apologize, Robby, that we did not provide you with a skateboard, but we did provide you with an audience that's really excited to hear your talk. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Jess. That was a wonderful intro. I really regret not bringing my skateboard. I did bring my whole family, and my parents from North Carolina came up to meet us, and I've got all the kids here. I think it's so wonderful to be able to show families and children what we do as academics, because it's hard enough to understand what people in a different department might do. So that's my segue to saying, it's a great honor to speak to you here at CMU and also in an HCI department, coming from the field of communication with a background in media psychology. We don't do things the same way all of the time. And so I would really love your feedback. You guys are the ones who I think interpret the types of data, similar types of data that people from my field deal with, but in ways that actually lead to the building of stuff, right? The actual kind of construction, the tangible creation of materials that is a bit far from people like me. We're a little more abstract for what it's worth. And I think, there of course are complementary values to what we provide as scholars, but please do feel free to give me feedback and help me interpret what I'm talking about today for the production of new technologies. Other things I want to mention is Preamble. Okay, so the metaverse has arrived. Hello, classes in VR. Goodbye, Zoom fatigue. April Fools. How often do I get to give a talk on April 1st? That's the best. So I had to make a corny joke out of this. And I will say this is two lies and a truth, mostly. And we can debate that if you want. And I'm going to try to go slow on this talk. There's a lot of content. So feel free, speak up, raise your hand. Let's interact. That's how I like to run class. I really wish I had a skateboard. I could like roll up to you and yeah, please.
I'll just say, if I put my hand up, I'm going to be representing our Zoom participants.
Oh, nice.
Someone on Zoom has a question or wants to participate.
Oh, please.
I will pretend to be that.
Yes. As I say in my class, which is students in class, sometimes in VR headsets, plus students on Zoom, sometimes in VR headsets. I say, okay, Zoomers, yeah. And yeah, sometimes it falls flat, but so one of these things is kind of true. I think I just gave it away. Hello, classes in VR, and not just my class. There's a class at Stanford that was taught not long ago by Jeremy Balanson. And then I just learned that Erica here took a class, helped design a class in COM in VR, students meeting twice a week in VR. So that's awesome. This is happening, guys. The metaverse has come to an education environment near you. But wait, has it really though? And that's what I think is not true. We'll talk about that in a moment, and then we'll talk about Zoom fatigue. And it might seem like I'm jumping between these topics and like, where's the common thread? But there is one on the very last slide where I talk about how I'm trying to synthesize all of these things. So we'll try to show a common thread though. So what will the metaverse be? I would argue that it will be an interconnected network of immersive virtual worlds where people embody avatars to work, socialize, and play together. Does anyone want to comment on that definition? Do you like that definition? Are we missing something? We're not really talking Web3 here, please.
Why does it have to be avatars?
Why? Yeah, that's a good point. I guess because if we're socially with each other, you need some form of self-representation. So that's the first reason. The second reason is because I wanted it in the definition so I could justify my research on avatars. But so it's a fair point. I guess it's avatars aren't integral to the definition. That's a good point. Other thoughts on this definition? Please.
I'm interested in how much immersion is required for this to be metaverse, because we've seen so many exciting things on the spectrum of mixed reality that
I agree, and it depends on how you define immersive. If to be immersed in one environment, does that mean you have to be kind of removed from the other environments? And if that's the case, then certainly I would argue that AR will be metaverse enabled. So the reason I go with immersive virtual environments is because I'm trying to differentiate between the flat screen social media that we have today and the social media that involves tracking head movements, which could be in AR as well. Can we think of a better term than immersive? Do you have any suggestions, anyone, or Jess?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I would argue, for example, for many of us, Facebook is extremely immersive, right? Or Twitter, you can just scroll endlessly and lose all sense of your body. And I think it's that word embodied that is doing a lot of work in your definition. Okay. That when you say immersive, a lot of what you mean is actually taking some sense of your physicality with you into the experience, and not just, reducing yourself to a pair of eyes and a pointing finger.
I think that's a really good point. From like the work on transportation, where you can read a book and be immersed, transported, right? And that's a book in text. We just had Melanie Green as a guest speaker at MSU recently, so we talked about this. So I would agree, immersive maybe isn't the best word. Embodiment helps us out, though I can have my students in my VR class, but sitting on their flat screen, playing it like a game. So they're not immersed in the same way if I'm trying to go for that sense of presence. So it's hard. It's hard to define. But the interconnected part, I think, is the linchpin, and the reason why I argue that we're not at the metaverse level yet. Does anyone know what I might mean by that, or want to speculate, or you've already thought about this? So for it to be the metaverse, I think it has to be like the internet. It needs to be a network of many different places that we can easily traverse. The internet isn't, a bunch of walled gardens of websites. I mean, it is in a way, but it's easy to navigate. So a metaverse browser where we can just jump into your avatar and go between different immersive or not immersive or whatever you want to call it, virtual environments. That feels like the metaverse to me to a greater extent. Go ahead. Yeah. Absolutely. So I don't go into that too much in this talk, though. I really am interested in this topic, right? The relationship between blockchain and crypto and NFTs and how that will facilitate this decentralized. So the argument I make right here is that the metaverse will be decentralized. I often get the question, what's so different about about the metaverse now from Second Life? And they're disconnected. So it'll be decentralized, but still interconnected because of blockchain and crypto. Can someone explain that to us? Does anyone want to take a stab at that? Do you want to, what's your understanding of how that might facilitate decentralization and interconnectedness?
So maybe the best way to think about it is you play a game. And by playing the game, you gain some kind of, it's not necessarily Ethereum, but you gain some kind of in-game currency.
Yeah.
And then you can use it purchase NFTs or other sort of things you might want from other kinds of properties that the company owns, but which are separate from the current gaming universe you're playing. So that facilitates a connection between different types of virtual versions.
Absolutely. Taking it a step further. So your example, I think, if I understood it properly, was you're playing a game, you're getting some currency. It's crypto, meaning the record of having it is on a blockchain, which is essentially a public ledger that lots of computers are sharing. Once you have that crypto, you can use it to buy stuff from another game that the company owns. But I would argue that and I think some people believe that it will be even more decentralized than that. It doesn't have to be owned by that one company. You can go from Facebook's workspaces over to Epic Games with the same avatar, with the same assets, at least in theory, right? We're not quite there yet. And that's why the metaverse hasn't arrived. But we will, of course, pay attention, and there will be many different applications for human communication, education, work, et cetera, in virtual spaces. They will become increasingly interconnected. I like to think of the time now, and maybe my dad can help me with the exact date. The time now for the metaverse is 94 for the internet?
Yeah. Probably.
Okay.
Maybe 92.
So you were working at Bell Labs. The internet was part of your daily work routine, right?
I remember when I made Snow Crash required reading on my lab. That was 1987.
Okay. Well, but it wasn't written until 92.
Yeah, 92, that's right.
But you started in 87.
But there were a few books in that genre which were popular at that point.
Yeah.
Gibson was one of those.
Neuromancer.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So cyberspace, the metaverse, it was all an idea that we had back then. People.
We used to call it telepresence.
Telepresence, yeah, absolutely. Feeling connected to other people through media. That's what the metaverse will do. That's why it's interesting. That's why when I read Snow Crash in 92, and you bought me the book, I think, in 2005, I was inspired to pursue graduate studies in virtual reality effects. I worked in Jeremy Bailenson lab, the Virtual Human Interaction Laboratory, running studies where people interacted with avatars or agents, and we had them mimic head movements at a certain delay or include face morphs of the participant's face. And then we looked at outcomes relating to persuasion or willingness to vote for a candidate, those kinds of things. I thought that was really cool. I thought Second Life was pretty cool. In 2006, I almost quit being a grad student to try to go work for Linden Labs. I'm so glad they didn't accept my application. I mean, they're doing okay, but I really do enjoy this topic. And I've never called myself a metaverse researcher until it was hip, right? Like when Facebook changed its name. But all this time, I've really been studying avatars and VR in networked contexts. So, but I want the metaverse now, as Pazzy and Bobo back there, my 4-year-olds, might say. And if you really want it now, I would argue there are some apps that can get us as close as possible to it. Please feel free to share any that you would add to this list, or that you endorse, or that you hate even. So Ready Player Me. Anyone heard of Ready Player Me? Nice. Have you used it?
Yeah, I've been using it myself. I've like looked at it and
Okay.
things.
Sure. And how about you?
I've never used it, but I do remember the name.
Ready Player Me. Yeah, just like Ready Player One, the movie, right? They're named for that. If there's any app that I think is better suited to facilitate that interconnected metaverse experience, it's Ready Player Me. They have partnered with hundreds of companies to allow you to use the same avatar file format, essentially across these different virtual worlds. Please.
What if you want to use a different avatar?
So then you have an avatar wardrobe. It's like your wallet, right? It's there in your wallet. You can easily switch between them, but you don't need to think like, oh, which avatars do I have in this space and which are in that space? Like, I'm having a work meeting with some people over in the Facebook world, and now I'm going to have a work meeting over there, same avatar. But if I'm going to play a game in Fortnite, I probably wouldn't use that same avatar, but it would be nice to be able to kind of be able to select for it in a different game. So I think we'll think less about the company that's the platform, and think more about our own identity through an app like Ready Player Me. And it's super easy. Guys, you could pull out your phone right now, jump in a web browser. You don't even have to log in. I promise I don't own any stock. You don't have to log in. You take a picture of yourself, and literally in less than 10 minutes, you can be in that avatar in VR chat in an Oculus Quest headset through, if you know the mechanism for onboarding. It's great. Engage. Who's heard of Engage besides Erica? Anyone? So this is the platform that Jeremy Valenson recommended to run classes in VR. It's a paid platform, unfortunately, if you want more than 5 people in a virtual world together. And I'll show you a video in a minute so you can see what the user experience is like for my students. How about Hubs, Mozilla Hubs? Quite a few people, yeah. So Hubs is great. It is so easy. You generate a link in the moment that you can share with anyone. It's a virtual world. You can navigate it in a VR headset or on a flat screen computer or on your phone. Same link, super easy to just create a world and be there with other people. The link isn't exactly persistent, and the worlds aren't super customizable. Getting your avatar from Ready Player Me into that world takes a few extra steps. You kind of have to download the file or copy. I think it's called a GLC link that goes to the Ready Player Me service. So it's easy. It's the best place to try the metaverse or a potential metaverse application for people who have no experience, but it's not the best place, I think, for supporting larger scale social environments. VR chat, a few people. It's a game. You can download it on Steam. And I think it's known for diversity in avatar representation. And I don't just mean DEI, equity and inclusion. You can be any race or gender or other human social category. You can be any size being you want. You can have like a little lobster playing immersive Among Us with, the Hulk. And so it's a pretty cool space for exploration. It's pretty flexible. My students love it as a place where they actually just go and hang out with friends. You've probably all heard of the Horizon suite, Horizon Worlds, Workrooms, and Venues. Has anyone tried it? Oh man, Horizon Workspaces is clunky, but it's cool. You feel like you're sitting there in a virtual meeting at a virtual desk, and you're trapped in your seat. It's like, I want to get out of this seat. You can pass through to your keyboard though. That's really cool, right? Imagine you're sitting at your tiny little laptop, and then you want to have 5 big screens, one for your code, one for your references, one for the paper you're writing. Boom, you've got a VR headset. You can do that, but you can do that way better in immersed. I'm not just saying that because I'm friends with a developer there who's an MSU alum. That kind of came out of my interest in this, but I've tried many different platforms. Immersed is the cool one that I think will really help with productivity in VR. And you can meet with other people and share your screen. It feels a little bit more flexible to me than workrooms, though none of these are perfect solutions quite yet. Decentraland. Lots of people heard? Never? No. Okay, this is not the legitimate logo, nor would I think Disney allow this to be in any sort of paid presentation context, but it is the most popular place to buy snake oil. I mean, virtual land. You've probably heard of the virtual real estate boom. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for a parcel of virtual land. That blows my mind. I mean, it's like buying server space that's, I guess, geographically tied to a region, which is why one place might have more value than another, but it's digital. So like, can you really trust that this is going to be the hub? Fine, Snoop Dogg is there to stay because he's making so much money because all the land near him is going for a lot of money. And it is decentralized. So you might expect, you might be able to trust the potential for market forces as opposed to a greedy corporate entity to guide the development of this space. But so it's one to watch, definitely one to watch. Ironically, though, everyone's talking about the metaverse and virtual land. You can buy NFTs in this place. You can't actually use a VR headset in Decentraland. It drives me bonkers that there's a conflation between this user experience of the metaverse, which is virtually based, it's immersive, if we want to call it that, and then this like Web3 future of the internet kind of distributed free-for-all that's happening, and I guess we expect the two to meet, but actually they don't, and especially in apps like this. All right, moving right along. Avatars. Why do I care about avatars? And how are we on time? Good. That clock is right? Okay. So avatars, the term avatar comes from Hinduism. It means descent, a god to an earthly form. It was also popularized in Snow Crash, right along with the term metaverse, though it has earlier video game origins, Ultima, Quest of the Avatar. The idea there was that it's not just a character, it's you. You are the god controlling this being in the game. And so the intent was to make you feel more identification with your character in the game. So I like to define avatars as a mediated representation. So it's not the self, it's never the self. It's a representation through some medium. It's not always digital. It can be a robot. I mean, it can be a human if you're a god. It can be, I don't know, a human if you're an alien. But I said a human user. But I do want to change this definition at some point in the future to an intelligent entity, because we could also imagine a smart enough AI having a representation of itself that would be its avatar. But the reason that, at least people in communication, because we sit around and argue about abstract definitions all the time. So the reason that we try to say human users, because we really want to distinguish from agents. It's not, you know, an NPC, non-playable character, the thing you ask for a quest from in a game. You don't want to call that an avatar. You want to imply that there's a smart being behind it. And usually that smart being is a human. I guess a dog or a chimpanzee could have an avatar as well. I wonder if there's research on that. So it's got to be a representation. It's got to be human, or at least intelligent. It's got to facilitate interactions with other stuff, other users, the environment, or objects. That's our definition of an avatar. And you know, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Jake Sully, the Blue Alien, those in some ways are pivots on the definition. In other ways, they are true to the origins. But why do avatars matter? Well, I would say it's your outfit in the metaverse. I mean, literally, your avatar can have different outfits, but then you can have different avatars. That avatar wardrobe, that wallet that you carry around in your cryptocurrency format. Hi, Bobo. So, yes. Why, though, do avatars matter? I would argue they matter, well, for many reasons, but the Proteus Effect is my one true theoretical love. This is what I've been studying for most, I would argue, of my time as an assistant professor and then going into it as an associate professor. I'm still very interested in it. And so let me tell you about it. Avatars are malleable. right? You can have a wardrobe of them. You can customize them, make them look differently, depending on your mood, right? So like the Greek god Proteus, who was a shapeshifter. So that's where the name comes from. This effect was discovered or coined by Nick Yee and Jeremy Bailenson, also at the VHIL lab. I was just a master's student at the time, so I wasn't involved in this research, but I saw it happening at the ground stage. So I thought that was great access for me to realize how cool this was. But this was in 2006, 2007. So people act in ways that are consistent with avatar characteristics. That's the basic tenet of the Proteus effect. So if you have certain avatar characteristics, such as height or age or attractiveness, children, please sit down. I know, it's boring. Guys, remember we play video games? Imagine if you were playing a game with a taller avatar, you would actually... Can you? No, not right now. But if you had a taller avatar, you might negotiate more aggressively. That's what the research suggests. If you have an avatar that's more or less attractive, that will affect your social confidence. Both in VR, it'll affect how close you stand to people. The more attractive avatar, you'll stand closer to the people you're talking to. After VR, you'll choose more attractive dating partners on a website, according to another study. If you see your avatar gain or lose weight while it's eating or exercising, or you're eating or exercising in that environment, it will affect your eating and exercise behaviors. And that one, with the exercise, we found that effect, Jesse Fox, Jeremy Bailenson, and one more author found the effect lasted for up to a week. So people who saw themselves in the avatar changing body shape during exercise exercised more in the following week than people who saw the avatar with another face. Go ahead, please.
Research that talks about like what motivates someone to choose or customize their avatar in certain ways and purposes.
Yes, there is. And that in some ways is related, but it's a slightly different angle on this question of the Proteus effect. The Proteus effect has usually been studied in contexts where we assign these characteristics to people and they don't realize that they're in one condition of, an experiment with random assignment. So that influence on their behavior is not a customization that they've chosen. That said, if we guide people to, and I'm an experimentalist, so I would prefer, because if you find, there was a study, and this was published as a Proteus Effect study by Nick Yee, the person who found it, and we rejected it from our meta-analysis because it looked at the height of avatars in World of Warcraft and some measure of social confidence, but that's a correlation. We don't know, did they customize taller avatars because of an underlying psychological characteristic, or did they happen to customize this taller avatar and that influenced their behavior? But we do find that when we guide people to customize avatars in certain ways, so I tell my students in one study to customize an actual self-avatar like you actually are, or an ideal self-avatar, or an ought self-avatar. In the student study, we found the ideal self-avatar and ought self-avatar users communicated more with other students in the forums. We just did like a basic kind of text and semantic analysis. I don't think we found semantic differences, but we found that they did worse in the class. It wasn't a huge difference, and we did balance assignment to condition, so I think it was ethical, so everyone had all the conditions, but they did worse on the exam after they had been in the ideal or ought self-avatar than the actual self-avatar. Few different potential reasons there, like maybe we were priming ideals that were unachievable. Maybe their ideals don't have anything to do with schoolwork. So maybe we accidentally primed like an ideal social self. So that's why they communicated more, but they didn't work as hard on the schoolwork. So avatar customization and why people choose it and how it might relate to the Proteus effect, those are rich topics. They're hard to study in an experimental way, but people love customization. The one clear answer to your question is when you allow people to customize compared to just giving them an avatar, they enjoy the experience more, they feel more identification, they experience more presence in the virtual environment. All of those things are kind of enhanced. So that's a really good question. All right, so we did a meta-analysis of this phenomenon. Are there any, my favorite one. And this one's been replicated multiple times. If you give people inventor avatars, lab coats and gray hair and glasses, compared to street clothes avatars, they are more creative in a brainstorming task. both during and after avatar use. That's so cool, right? They come up with more ideas. Maybe they persist more. Why? Why is this happening? Theoretically, Balanson and Yee argue that it's coming from self-perception theory, which is the notion that we don't always understand what our attitudes are. So we imagine ourselves from a third-person perspective, and we observe our behaviors, and then we infer our own attitudes. So it's like, oh, I went to the Mexican restaurant, I ate the salsa, I must like spicy food. So next time I'm going to order the salsa, right? Even if I don't realize or I don't remember that I was kind of nudged to the Mexican restaurant by the experimenter or my family members or whatever it is. So, so self-perception theory. Now, when I see the avatar representing me, I attribute the characteristics, not necessarily behavioral characteristics, but the identity-related characteristics to my self-perception, to my cognitive schema that I associate with myself. Then as I go off and I do things, that cognitive schema that's salient in my self-concept in those moments influences my behavior. That's how we might explain theoretically what's going on there. And at the time we ran this meta-analysis, there were 45 studies. Now I think we're all probably up to 55. We've run a new meta-analysis, which is not published yet, though I think we're presenting it at ICA this year, where we find that the effect is stronger for VR-based studies compared to those that used a flat screen. We also tried to do an uncanny valley measure. You guys know the uncanny valley? So when, we only had images of the avatars from the studies. We didn't have the original avatars. So we had participants rate the images. We didn't find that uncanny valley avatars that were perceived as more uncanny were in studies with lower effect sizes. That was our hypothesis, but we didn't actually conduct that study very well because we didn't have the actual avatars. So that's an area where I think, the question is, why is the Proteus effect strong in some studies and not in others? Why do we find it? And so that's one area for research. That's not actually where I'm going to go. Let's go back to VR class, though. Let's get back to the metaverse. This is my class.
Tell me the point you were just making about multitasking. As someone with like ADHD, like sometimes it helps you focus more.
Sorry, I'm going to go to full screen on this.
Tasking. As someone with like ADHD, like sometimes it helps you focus more. If you like onto the class stuff, we're able to kind of just mess around with the different features in the world and like spawn different objects.
I just had 10 years to break out and check my email or multitask because I was invested in the environment that I'm in here.
Yeah,
I need to do something with my hands, but like I'm doing stuff in the actual thing that we're doing.
Yeah.
I can move my hands around in real life during instruction, but because I'm in here, I can keep myself occupied.
This large pillow, though, is like one way of discussion. We're discussing it. And are these avatars right here, guys, based on our discussion today? This man in the black shirt? Is he an avatar? No. Look at the inside of his face. Doesn't have teeth. She's so happy. Your tuition dollars are paying for your experience here. So is this better than Zoom? Like, speaking of tuition, do you think your parents could be convinced?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why?
Yeah, there's no doubt.
Because I
The
feel like
level of interaction is so much higher.
Yeah, a lot more interaction. I would agree with that.
Hold on. I got some.
Yeah.
Much more stimulated in an environment like this. Therefore, we are more apt to remember this experience and, as such, the things that we're learning. But if we're in a boring Zoom meeting, you don't really remember anything after the first 10 minutes.
Exactly. Especially it's just like a long
circle around the point at Robby.
I can
Suddenly becomes more interested in the lecture.
this is much more interesting than
it's true in the AM math class.
Is that the real time up there on that clock? So how long have we been in VR together? Since about 11 hours. I suppose. We've been in here for an hour together. Wow. Does it feel like the time went by pretty fast?
Yeah. This is the big difference though. Taking Zoom classes like during lockdown, all the days kind of just blended together because you're looking at the same background, the same like UI every single day. This, at least you're gonna have a differentiation in what you see every single time. You can go to a different environment or experience something different that will actually stimulate your brain and force you to remember what's going on.
Yeah.
All right. I did get all my students' permission to show that video, and couple notes there. So this is one of our, I just don't want this to play. This is one of our very first classes in VR, all of us in VR together. I realized after a few classes, I shouldn't give them all permission to spawn objects like everywhere. But that's a really good point though from the beginning, right? Like you need a fidget. You need to multitask sometimes. It's hard to be there fully attentive. So I let them draw in 3D and I let them spawn objects within reason away from the main screen. Please.
I say, when you say VR.
Yes.
What exactly is the technology stack? Like, did you issue them all cardboards for their phones?
Yeah, it was Quest 2s. So I bought 16 Oculus Quest 2s.
Okay.
And then for the students who didn't have them, I had 16 students. I bought 16. I only had to give away 8. 8 of them already had Quest 2 headsets. They're $300. They're like gamer tools, right? So we've got this, because we're a College of Communication Arts and Sciences and a Media and Information department, we've got a bunch of production classes. So students check out video cameras and lighting all the time. So I was able to just put my headsets in there and have that get managed centrally, which was really nice.
So were they on their home networks or on the campus network?
In this video, they were on their home networks. That's a great question because that's the bottleneck, right? Though now, when we had started the semester, we were fully online for the first couple of weeks. And that made audio management a lot easier. Now audio is the worst part of trying to teach class in VR, as you guys know. So when I'm in person now, but I let some of my students stay home because of COVID, like if you don't want to come, that's fine, you Zoom in. I've got people in person on the great network and they're speaking. So we actually do all Zoom audio, but that means we have one mic. And so then the students who are not near the mic aren't heard as well by the people who are only hybrid. The best solution for that is to go all VR audio, but then you're in the classroom with people and you're hearing them and you're getting a feedback loop. So I don't think there's an easy solution but next year we're actually moving to California for a year. So I'm teaching all of my classes remotely in VR. So then I force my students to be in VR fully, no hybrid. Please.
Follow-up question then. First, I have not used the latest Oculus. I know in previous generations.
The Quest?
Yeah. In previous generations, I became violently nauseous. And I don't know if your students encountered any physiological effects.
Most of them have not mentioned simulator sickness at an acute level. I only have one woman in my class, and she's one of my RAs, and she's like amazing. She loves this topic. So that's why she took the class. And unfortunately, there's a gender distinction there that's an equity and inclusion issue. So even though some of this research is designed toward reducing the gender equity issues in Zoom, we have the same issues in VR. But refresh rate is much better in Quest 2. So I would argue that sim sickness will be lower. But like spoiler alert, I'll make the argument that maybe VR and avatars can be used to reduce the inequity, at least with respect to gender, in Zoom fatigue, because avatars will reduce some of the gendered characteristics that cause them. Unfortunately, though, even if we reduce the inequity, VR is fatiguing. It's really tiring. Like an hour in VR with my students, I did that a few times after that first meeting, and they started telling me like, Robby, we need breaks. Like we can't do this. It's, it's a screen strapped to your face. So I don't see an easy answer here yet. And you're asking all the right questions to help us get toward it. Yeah, for sure. Please.
The class is on VR.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons it works, right?
Yeah.
Next semester, I'm teaching the class on VR, in VR, and then I'm also teaching an avatar psychology class in VR. So I'm trying to move away from that because I'd love to have a consortium of faculty, across the world who teach in VR on any subject, and we can support that mode of teaching. I think it can be way better than Zoom. I also think it could be better than in person on certain subjects, but it depends on what you're doing. So please.
This is really something that I've never used before. When you do VR classes, is the audio like spatialized? Like if someone's surprising?
It can be. but I find it's better to turn it off because my students, they just want to like teleport all over the space. And so they'll be close, they'll be far. And I do too. I can't just sit, I'm a fidgeter. So, so I turn off 3D audio if we're all in VR so we can hear each other at equal sound. As the host, I can manage the setting for the whole room. I don't know, there might actually be a personalized setting as well in Engage, and it really depends on the platform. So in Spatial, Erica, do you remember?
I would turn it off for everybody.
You would turn off 3D audio because you want people to be able to hear each other. So that means that it's a terrible environment to have a large kind of mingling social, because you can't get into subgroups unless you are together. Have you guys used GatherTown? Yeah. I mean, that's a great example of a strong effort at spatial audio, but still, it's so awkward. It's so clunky. Yeah, that's where we do our NSF PI meetings. It's just like, it's cool. We're experimenting with it, but it's not going super smoothly. Okay, so Zoom fatigue. So equity is a major issue for Zoom across multiple studies because of this Zoom fatigue issue. Zoom fatigue is 15% higher on average for women than men. In my study with 600 or so participants, we found it to be 11% higher for Asian than white participants. And that's at the average. If you look at the people in the top 20th percentile of Zoom fatigue, it's 3 times as likely for women than men. We didn't find other race differences in our study, but other studies with bigger samples have found those race differences, though sampling was a bit different. Ours was essentially a randomized sample from a survey platform. Some of the studies with thousands of participants have been self-selection. You know, the study's been advertised on TV, and so people who are maybe interested in the topic go there. So we don't know exactly where. Well, we know there's a problem. We just don't know exactly who for whom the effect is most detrimental. One likely cause, in addition to just eye strain and being stagnant and having big faces in your face and all these things being unnatural, in addition to those psychological factors, the social psychological factor that is likely relevant here is negative self-focused attention. Self-video, looking at yourself for hours at a time reminds you of how you're presenting to other people. We included in our study a measure of facial dissatisfaction. So the less happy you are with how your face looks, that mediated the differences for gender and for this one racial difference on Zoom fatigue. And overall, these are significant indirect effects. 0.15 R squared, it's not the biggest effect, right? But it is still notable. Please.
Sorry, I was going to run, but in order to one.
Yeah.
One question would be, did you check who actually turned off their video? I know that kind of my Zoom experience, but and I completely agree with that. That's so much better than they just turn off.
Turned off. Yeah.
Did you control for that, or did you kind of have any?
I think we asked about it, and it's really rare.
Yeah.
Most people don't do it.
Yeah.
I can't do it. I'm too much of a narcissist. I have to see myself.
I got over myself. It's like
I wonder. I would be interested in what psychological correlates there are to like discomfort with not seeing yourself versus seeing yourself, right? Like self-monitoring is a psychological construct we said. So maybe high self-monitors prefer it.
Privilege and whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Please.
Consequences for not self-monitoring or for failures of self-monitoring are not evenly distributed. So
That's a good point too. Yeah. Please.
Yeah, I was just gonna speak as an Asian woman, so I think negative self-focused attention probably understand this cause. I was wondering, or not wondering, I just want to share my experience.
Please do, yeah.
as someone
Thank
who,
you.
I have ADHD, so I'm neurodivergent people. I'm aware, personally, having the video on is like a form of body doubling for me, so I use that. I actually think I have a Zoom fatigue, like I'm like energized by seeing myself, because I actually use like, when I'm not on Zoom, I use like a mirror to like get my brain in like high like functioning mode.
Yeah.
Because I'm like kind kind of nervous.
That's so interesting.
Watch myself.
Yeah.
And I do it on purpose. So I just.
Sure. It's like practicing your speech in the mirror, right?
So that's kind of how I use. It is kind of narcissistic.
No, that was just a self-deprecating joke, not at all a general statement. I think though self-monitoring is at least theorized in social interactions, and we're including it in a follow-up study. So you might be a high self-monitor. You just want to know how you're presenting, and that helps you get energized. That could be correlated with other factors, demographics and otherwise, but please.
So who did you survey?
We use the platform Prolific. And so I think it's, a quasi representative, but not really adult sample.
Did you buy their representative sample for the United States, or did you just try to win it?
So I don't actually buy that their sample's representative. Because at the end of the day, they've got their pool. I think when you buy the representative sample, it just means that they're matching the characteristics. Yeah. So it's people on the Prolific platform who know about how to make money in this way, which I have to assume is correlated with education access and high-speed internet and social networks where people. So I mean, that's a caveat that we mention in all of these studies. I don't know. Do you prefer MTurk or another platform?
It's always a problem. I think there is one problem that I'm trying to get around is how do we get away from people who are tech workers by nature?
Mhm.
That's exactly the zombies platform. I am pleasantly surprised that I see also a diversity both on MTurk and on Prolific.
Mhm.
And so both in my research.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question because and also I think it depends how it's advertised, right?
Mhm.
So I'm curious, did you say this was a survey about Zoom, or how did you advertise?
We did, and we required that participants had, I think, had at least 2 Zoom meetings in that day prior to the survey. Dad?
I have a suggestion for follow-up research.
Please.
So a number of companies use what I call digital mirrors.
Mhm.
So you can just go stand in front of a digital mirror, you can try out different clothes.
Yeah.
So I think Amazon, Macy's, there. What if you went in front of it, put a bunch of people in front of a digital mirror, and all of them could see themselves as this middle-aged white guy, and put them through that process, and then see if that eliminates the gender and racism.
So that is the solution that I cannot advocate for because people love customizing avatars to represent themselves, right? The conclusion on many of my studies is like, oh, if people are reminded of stereotype threat, their performance is diminished. We can use avatars to solve that problem. But wait a minute, we don't want everyone to, be homogenous because people want to be themselves. So customize. So that's why I thought, okay, we can customize people to represent an actual self. You asked me that question, right? So if you customize people to be an actual self, then you'll trigger stereotypes. If you customize avatars maybe to represent other elements of your identity that are not stereotyped, then it could serve as a buffer against stereotype threat while still allowing people to express themselves and enjoy that avatar experience. And we have one study where we do have some support for that. I forget if I report that in the next slide. Maybe. Let's see it in a moment. I was looking at it as potentially reporting it. So one possible solution is avatars in virtual meetings, but I don't think they should all be middle-aged white guys, but we don't know exactly what they should be. And maybe this could, but avatars in general could reduce self-focused attention. Even if it looks just like you might be worried less about, your mannerisms or putting on a nice shirt for the day or the food smudge that I probably actually have. But avatars also carry stereotypes. Okay, so yeah, I hinted at it here. We know that both men and women, if they use a woman avatar compared to a man avatar in a context of competition, they'll do worse on a math test. They'll do worse in a video game. In my study, one study, we had women play with an avatar that, the first study, we actually had them play and we triggered stereotype threat by making them think about their opponent as being a male or a female. And they not only performed worse in the game when they thought their opponent was a male, so triggering stereotype threat, they also said that they thought men would be better in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, when they thought they were in the game context playing against a man. So what does this say? The argument that I've tried to build up through multiple studies now is that toxicity in gaming, especially gender toxicity, reinforces these stereotypes, not just about gaming, but about STEM fields writ large. And so we've got this vicious cycle kind of reinforcing some of the inequities in gender and other social categories, most likely, but gender is the easiest one to study in gaming context. So we should care about gaming. We should care about this entertainment area if we're going to try to solve the problems writ large. All right, so here's a follow-up study. We just ran this. It's not published yet, so don't hold me to everything, please. But a couple hundred undergrads, as we know, women reported higher Zoom fatigue. Perhaps unsurprisingly, women reported much lower intent to use the metaverse. We had items like, I plan to use the metaverse, 1 to 5 scale. But this is an unbalanced triangle, 2 positives and a negative. But we have Zoom fatigue positively predicting metaverse intent. What do I mean by an unbalanced triangle? We would normally expect, you know, if A likes B and B likes C, then A likes C. If A doesn't like B, then A and B like C, then A shouldn't like C. So we would always have 2 negatives together, not just 1. But in this case, despite the fact that women have more Zoom fatigue and less intent to use the metaverse, the more Zoom fatigue you have, the more intent you have to use the metaverse, driven by men and women. And so what does that mean? Like, maybe we can infer that people perceive the metaverse as an attractive alternative to video. Maybe there's this intuitive understanding that, like, being in Zoom meetings is boring. Being in VR will keep my hands busy, will help me pay more attention to class, that kind of thing. But this is speculation. This is a very early study. And anecdotally, VR class is pretty exhausting. So I don't want to oversell this, but I do just want to make the argument that potentially people already see this as an alternative. People will be willing to adopt it, and maybe we can reduce Zoom fatigue through the metaverse, through avatars. But so what are the future directions? Here's that common thread thing again. So the metaverse plus avatars, Proteus Effect, and virtual meeting fatigue. Maybe we can figure out ways to, I guess, set up our classes, maybe from settings from a pedagogical perspective or from a technological perspective, like what are the user settings, 3D audio, avatar assignment, avatar customization guidelines, et cetera, that promote equity and inclusion. And this is the main focus of my NSF work at the moment. Also, maybe we can increase efficiency in remote work. So big screens, small laptops, sharing 3-dimensional objects in the same space together. Maybe we can nudge users toward healthy and pro-social behaviors. We can use the Proteus Effect. You're in the fit avatar and you're, eating healthier or exercising more. Potential concerns, there's always the other side of the sword. So data privacy, VR headsets track all of your movements. A lot of those things are health relevant. Maybe you have a health condition that you don't want the world or Facebook or whoever to know about, but it's divulged by those behaviors, the way your body's just moving. Digital virtual divides between the meta space and the meat space. So despite the fact that I seem to be a metaverse evangelist, especially in educational contexts, because I think it could promote equity. On the other hand, if the metaverse university is 30% of the price of regular tuition, then we end up with this kind of social class divide, the people who can afford to go to school in person, those who cannot. And maybe the better education is in person, especially if you need lab space or you need to write notes instead of just kind of being there in VR. So that's a concern. And lastly, nefarious nudges. Essentially the Proteus Effect, pushing you toward extremist views, wasteful behaviors, buy this thing. So this is pretty much the majority of my talk, but I'm going to end with something fun. Are my kids close by? This is the fun part. Jeannie Lowe, bring them in. All right. So as a kid, my parents here can attest that well, I don't know if I was so performative, but I always really liked rap and hip hop culture and music. And so as an adult, I decided to create nerdy raps to summarize some of my theoretical interests and research topics. And so that's what I did. This is a Proteus recap. Is this gonna run? I gotta turn this down. All right. Please excuse this divergence. It might be odious. I hope I helped you learn, yes, about the Proteus Effect, yes, a phenomenon, which I've written many research papers on. And this nerdy song, the Proteus Effect, is when your virtual self, yes, your avatar, changes how you think and act. And yes, that's bizarre, but replications we see in a diversity of contexts, e.g., taller avatars cause more aggressive negotiating, attractive avatars, more confident online dating, darker skinned avatars, divesting, older avatars, more future investing, healthy size avatars, exercise proclivity, inventor avatars, more creativity, gendered avatars, self-stereotyping, antisocial avatars, negatively griping. The list goes on. Effect size is relatively strong for a media effect phenomenon. And if you want these details and stats, I know that there's a published meta-analysis. I wrote it. But let's discuss ethical implications, avatars for influence or persuasion. I call it avatarification, related to gamification, but potentially more efficacious. Virtual you is a significant cue to affect your self-perception and direct what you do. It's an opportunity that is ripe to abuse, to push you toward crap you likely shouldn't choose. So let's be careful with the virtual self. Researchers, focus on education and health. Don't let the power to compel your clientele, though I know inevitably technology is a double-edged sword, so we will definitely need to achieve new media literacies, especially as avatars are increasingly ubiquitous. So we must discuss what to trust. Just because it's virtual doesn't make it virtuous. And I hope this rap was not superfluous. And now you know the effect named Proteus. Oh, thank you. That was fun. I mixed up a couple lines there. I would say this was my favorite product of my sabbatical a couple years ago. So any opportunity I can to share it, I do. But thank you all so much. This was fun. All right, now the kids will be bored again, but let's ask some questions if you have any follow-ups. Please.
You didn't just skateboard into class. You skateboarded into class with a twin in each arm when they were babies.
Oh, yes, that is true. Yeah.
Every one of them is wondered to this.
Much to their mother's dismay.
They don't remember. So please.
Question, but with the speculation you have about Zoom fatigue and intent to use Metaverse,
Yeah.
One, again, this is very early speculation I was thinking is the people who got VR fatigue might naturally be more sensitive in general to like stimulation. So it might be that those people also will be more fatigued by Zoom as they are in VR. But it's just that they find that the fatigue is about the same, but the benefit is better with VR.
It does. So cost might be the same, but reward might be higher. But we really need to test that. I know Benji Lee at NTU is creating a virtual meeting fatigue scale. So I assume he's going to do research on this topic. So it'll coming soon to a journal near you. Okay.
Why would I want to use Metaverse if I get fatigue?
Yeah.
That would be actually my.
Yeah. So maybe it's more efficient or yeah. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have a great question. How much do you think like the novelty effect of the metaverse itself is a driving factor for people preferring the metaverse, just thinking about not to know about it versus saying that and then when you're doing further studies of this section, how would you separate out the novelty effect?
That is a really good question. Novelty effect is huge. And I know Jeremy looked at
weekly data. Jeremy Bailenson looked at weekly data from his students over 2 10-week courses now. And he did study the way that the dissipation of certain behaviors, but I don't remember exactly what he found. But I can tell you, my students now, 12 weeks into the semester where we meet every week in VR, they still enjoy class and pay a lot of attention, but I think they get tired more easily. They still fidget. They don't fidget at the same level. It's less like, woo, I gotta try. Wow, I can make a Tyrannosaurus Rex. I can make 25 of them. I can make them huge, right? Like they're not doing all of that, but they are still drawing everywhere in 3D. And they're being creative because I think in that space, they can keep it novel for themselves in a way for a long time. So it'll be hard to study because it will continually be novel, but also there's like, that's the nature of the medium. So I think it's a tough one. Please, Erica.
I was wondering if you saw like new forms of joyful or playful interaction in your VR class. Like one example from ours was that the students made up new ways to pass notes. And the instructor kind of just let it happen because she wanted to see how it unfolded.
Yeah.
So, like, the students were attached with sticky notes to like 3D models of cats, and then just moving the cats all the way across the classroom. If you saw any of that.
That is so funny. No, not the note passing, but they're always trying out with the 3D pen. They at first, your first inclination is to write with it. So they were writing words, but then we were in an enclosed space. It was a gymnasium because we were talking about VR sports training that day. And one of my students just walked back and forth, dotting and dashing all the way through. And it created this amazing fabric that we were all a part of as we kind of walked through the space. I don't tone any of that down. I really like it because I think as long as it's not Oh, and I didn't actually show you this. We have a big screen, a virtual screen that I throw up in the front of the room. And then before they jump into VR, they type in questions about the readings on this app called Slido, which is kind of like Poll Everywhere. And then I can bring that web page up so I can kind of get them to talk with me about whatever questions they have in those moments directed by what's in front. So as long as they don't get in the way of this artifact, which is really important for the class discussion, I let them play and be creative. And yeah, passing notes though, I think Engage has sticky notes, but I don't know if there are digital cats that they can put them onto, but we'll try that. That's cool.
Like very similar questions. Like, what's like the these platforms, especially if that's one you use? How affordances for more like private interaction versus like if I draw something in 3D, everyone's gonna see a little funny whale, right? Like, what if I don't? Right? And then if I want to take notes, but do it in the 3D space, but do it just for myself, right? What kind of affordances are already there? And is that area?
That's a really interesting question. So I know in the space we're using for ICA is having does anyone go to ICA? You've heard of ICA, International Communication Association. Yeah. So we have a digital artifacts exhibition. And of course, the leadership was like, Robby, do this. I was like, okay, fine. So it's a virtual environment. We're gonna have Quest 2s that people can access, and you'll walk up to these art pieces that people have made, and you can create a privacy bubble where audio is restrained just within that square. So it's not 3D spatial audio for everyone, but when you first talked about privacy, that's initially what I thought of, like social privacy. But I also like intrapersonal privacy, the idea of taking notes to yourself. And I haven't seen tools like that in Engage, in spatial. No. But I imagine if you're in something like Immersed or Facebook workspaces where you're on your computer and in VR and potentially with other people in that virtual environment, that's a user case where the affordances for intrapersonal privacy, like I don't want to share this monitor with everyone else, but I do want to share this monitor, and I can see both, and I can take notes in either one, right? So that's probably already there. So I would look at Immerse. Check out Immerse if you're interested in that topic. Please.
I just have a follow-up for the Zoom fatigue study that I was thinking about. So I wonder, have you looked, are there any studies about in-person fatigue? And if there's a gender difference with in-person fatigue?
I don't remember. I would really expect that to be in some of the theoretical work on Zoom fatigue. But I don't remember seeing it.
Comparison group here, because I'm thinking about this more, and I'm thinking, well, I think negative self-focused attention is an interesting hypothesis, but I also think that's an action, like for me in everyday life. You know, it's
So is the inequity issue worse in Zoom, or maybe it's not as bad?
I think my fatigue happened when the novelty effect wore off. But I also think that I had reached an in-person fatigue level at that point.
Being in person is fatiguing. It really is. But
yeah.
Absolutely. And we can measure it better in these digital environments. In addition to thinking about fatigue as an equity issue, I'm also in our studies thinking about turn taking. And we can definitely measure like just the amount of volume coming out of one microphone in Zoom in a way that we can't in a face-to-face meeting. And so, yeah, we should probably do more control group face-to-face to mediate it for this area of research. Go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things that I happen to remember, so I just looked it up, is that the fatigue in person for women is mediated by the proportion of women who are there, which makes sense, right? Like when I was the only woman in my computer science classes, I was like, oh my God, show nothing. You know, you are in danger here. Yeah, you're always on alert. So I wonder if that's something that you could look at in terms of the gender composition of the Zoom meetings, in terms of who is present and who's perceived to be watching.
Yeah, right? Absolutely.
I think that there's potentially really interesting.
There's a great,
there.
theoretical tie into stereotype threat. That's a very common mechanism that studies have used to operationalize stereotype threat, like put you in a room full of,
That's right. And you could think about that, like, what is it? The like 30% threshold, right? When more than 30% of a group is made up of a particular identity, then people stop seeing themselves as members of the identity group and start seeing themselves as individuals again. You stop feeling like, oh, I'm representing all women here, right? So that could also be a really interesting way to design the study, whether or not that threshold is being triggered, where people are self-perceiving as group members rather than self-perceiving as, or trust that they will be perceived by others as individuals.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Do you guys know side theory? Social identity de-individuation effects. Yeah, that makes me think about de-individuation, seeing yourself as an individual. And that really relates to avatars.
Yeah, I just think you should work with the HCI on this.
This is great. This is great.
We think this is cool. So.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the theoretical foundation for the Proteus effect as part of it, right?
Exactly.
Side theory.
So
you're de-individuated
right
in the avatar. Yeah, it does. It does.
Favorite thing.
Please.
Speaking of the Proteus effect, I have a question. You mentioned some work that shows that you can see some carryover effects that persist beyond the virtual experience.
Yeah.
I'm curious about cases where there could be a harmful contrast between the empowerment, for example, you feel as an avatar and what you experience in reality. Are there ways to bridge that gap? For example, there's work that shows with fictional narratives, if you prime somebody with a character they identify with that they can feel empowered by, that gets to have an effect in their real life experience. Do you think there are ways of either reminding people or priming them, or in some way, at least psychologically re-embodying an avatar in real life context that might sort of re-trigger that effect so you don't have that contrast?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think I've always thought about we often get this question with the Proteus effect of like, how long does it last? And I think you're asking the next follow-up, the best follow-up question, which is how can we keep it going? And even if you're not in the virtual environment, I think from my understanding of the theoretical kind of foundations for the Proteus effect, it's self-concept change. And that's not lasting if you're not reminded of it. But people spend a lot of time on their phones, right? We are constantly reminded of our virtual identities in these social media spaces. So you can imagine having an avatar that's persistent, not just in the virtual environment where I go to class, but then I pop into my, I don't know, Instagram feed or Snapchat or TikTok, whatever the kids are using in those future days. And my avatar is kind of persistent across the spaces and reminds me of whatever empowered experience I was having in VR. To a lesser extent, probably because embodiment is lower. But I think that's a cool idea. I hadn't really thought about it in the way you phrased it, like as the gap filling. Yeah, we should. Please. Oh, please.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious on the Proteus Effect thing is in these environments where you're creating an avatar or your avatar is given to you or whatever, are there any things on the interaction side of what that avatar can do that rather than sort of just the embodiment of the physical appearance or something like that might actually also affect how you feel and things? An example is I read a story that the Facebook, whatever workplace, like no one could frown. Like you couldn't frown in that environment. Like none of the avatars could frown. Now, and everyone, like, of course, it's like a funny news article and stuff, but it was interesting. It's like they've actually, the designers have said, like, you cannot have a frown as an interaction. In a way, as designers of these environments, we can dictate what interactions you can and can't have. So I guess it's like, I'm curious, like, from an interactivity perspective, is there anything on that connecting the Proteus Effect versus just embodiment and visual appearance?
That's such a funny and fascinating anecdote to connect to this idea. I haven't seen any work on this, but you could like that's a ripe area for a really interesting research study.
Around like how you move or something like that. I don't know, there's other interactive components.
Interactive and emotive components, especially because that's like the core of social interaction in these spaces is the emotional connection you have with people and how you express to them. And Facebook has been called the happiest place on earth long before, right? Because people would only post good things about themselves. And so issues of social comparison and interactivity there, like maybe we could take it from that flat 2D context and use a metaphor for the Proteus Effect. I like that idea a lot. Thanks. Yeah, I'll log that one.
All right. I think we are just about at time. So I'm going to say thank you so much for being here, Robby. This was amazing.
You guys were a really fun group to speak with. I really appreciate it. And okay, Zoomers, it was nice to meet you too.
Thank you so much for listening to the talk. That was a wonderful appearance from our guest, me, or not. I hope you liked it, and I hope that you forgive me for not doing a real podcast episode here. Thanks so much to Jessica Hammer for hosting me there at Carnegie Mellon, and of course the entire Human Computer Interaction Institute. And I look forward to hearing you more in the future. I mean, you hearing me. Thank you, SpartyCast listener.